I was asked to speak with y'all about liability considerations and also some solutions and some things you want to consider. As I see this, this is a conversation that definitely can continue well beyond this hour that we have together. It's a conversation that I have often with folks as they grow their programs, and I always like a new challenge, so if you have a specific situation you would like to talk about, just let me know, and we can continue the conversation. This presentation, just so you know, I have a bunch of resources that I'll be referring back to on our Pass It On Center website, and you can get more information there if you just go to passitoncenter.org, and there's a wealth of information that you can find there. So I'm going to talk to you about some ways that you can really identify some liability concerns you might have and also how to address those. So we're going to talk about developing policies and procedures. That's one of the first things that I encourage people to do. We're going to talk about some liability issues to consider. I'm also going to run through some information that would be helpful for you to know that the FDA has and some research that we've done with the FDA. And then I'm going to share some of the Pass It On Center checklists that are available for you without any problem. You can have them. They're open to everyone. So the thing, as we're laying the foundation for this conversation, we do know that assistive technology reuse changes lives for the positive. There's an image here of a gentleman who received a reused piece of technology, a durable medical device, and it's a scooter. There's another image that I often show whenever I'm telling the story here of him actually moving from a wheelchair. It was a manual wheelchair, and he's reaching out to this scooter, this red shiny scooter. I actually know him, and I've seen him zipping all around Atlanta in his new scooter, and it's exciting to see the freedom that's there. And I think if we can stay focused on what is the ultimate goal of reuse, is assisting folks and increasing, obviously, their access and acquisition to assistive technology and durable medical equipment, then and work with those liability issues so that we can stay focused on that goal, it really will make a difference. So AT reuse, it really is a concept that was born out of need. Almost everyone that I've talked to, including some of your centers in California, the reason why they're in this business is because people need this type of equipment. They need this service. So we're seeing that it really does promote increased independence in participation in educational environments, in the workplace, and definitely in communities. So if we can stay focused on that, then the rest of it, it helps inform our conversation here. We also, I just wanted to cover some of the definitions. It's been a while since I have spoken with y'all, but as we're talking about liability, we want to consider these definitions. So device exchange, that's basically like a Craigslist or eBay. California has, just like a lot of other states, an exchange network where they're basically like a classified ads that perhaps is online, a website where you can go and you can facilitate that folks will meet, and one person might sell or donate a piece of equipment to another person. So that's the exchange. There's less liability involved in exchange, but there's also less activity. For example, in Georgia, we had about 55 folks who benefited from our exchange network activities, where 55 people in Georgia got equipment that way through our online exchange. But when you look at it compared to our reassignment refurbishment activities, over 5,000 people benefited from that. So it's just a matter of figuring out how can you really serve the folks that you're working with. Device loan is another reuse activity, and what that actually is loaning a piece of equipment to someone for long term. We're not talking, a day or a week or a month. We're talking long term, a year, 2 years, several months. And it often, it also includes kind of the mindset that you really don't care if you get that piece of equipment back. And the difference here between device loan and some of the other activities is if you're loaning a piece of equipment, then you retain the ownership. And that's where some of the liability issues that we're going to talk about today, that's where you want to think about some of that. Because if you actually own a piece of equipment and somebody gets hurt on that piece of equipment, then you have different liability issues than if you give that piece of equipment and transfer that ownership to somebody else. Then it's their liability. It's their piece of equipment, and so the liability then all of a sudden changes pretty much at the sign of a piece of paper, or just the way that your organization is set up. We're going to talk about reassignment and refurbishing a lot. Reassignment is actually getting equipment in and getting it right back out to someone else. You may clean it. Hopefully you are cleaning the equipment. If you don't clean the equipment in a safe way, an appropriate way, then you're opening yourself up to, once again, liability issues, but also to yucky viruses and bacteria and other little critters that can live on this equipment. And so want to make sure that when you're reassigning equipment that you're doing it in a safe and appropriate way. And then refurbishing is very detailed. It's where you get equipment in, you are getting that equipment up to manufacturer standards, you are cleaning that equipment, sanitizing often that equipment, and getting it back out. And then remanufacturing is another activity that we have seen folks do, but we absolutely encourage people not to do this. If you do this, you are really a lawsuit waiting to happen, because our manufacturers go through rigorous protocols and testing when it comes to developing their technology. And if you remanufacture, you take, for example, a Invacare chair, and that's a manual chair, and you turn it into a power chair, which, believe it or not, I have seen, then you have created a new device, and that's not a good thing to do. So do not remanufacture. And on the slide here I say no, no, no. And then recycling, just for definition's sake, recycling actually, and y'all in California know this better than your peers in other states that I have seen, that it's taking a material and then turning it into something else. So taking milk cartons and turning that into carpet. That's one of many examples. So I've got a sign up here that says the beginning, and this is indeed the beginning, is understanding what type of reuse activity are you doing, and how does that affect your liability concerns. In the next few slides you'll see that I've actually spelled some of this out in more detail. As I said, the device exchange it's truly matching. Almost every program that we work with across the United States and territories, our states and territories, have some type of exchange network that they're a part of or are involved in. And then the loan is defined there. Reassignment, as I said, just taking that equipment and then giving it to a new user. And then the refurbishing is more of that detailed repairing, restoring, and then getting that back out. And then remanufacturing, not recommended. You don't want to alter the original manufacturer standards and specifications or the function. And then recycling. So there's all kinds of reuse programs out there. Some accept and refurbish durable medical equipment. Some accept and refurbish computers and digital devices. We're seeing more and more of this activity with the iPads, iPhones, Droid platforms, Droid devices that are out there. A lot of people are getting Blackberries and even GPS wayfinding devices in. So lots of programs that are starting up for those purposes. We're also seeing some that are very specific for hearing aids and CCTVs, for folks that have vision-related issues. And then there are some that are dedicated to sharing assistive technology only in school settings. We've worked a lot with schools and talked to them about some of their liability issues and some of the things you want to consider. And then some receive donated medical supplies for redistribution. There's a program, for example, in North Dakota that I've worked with called HERO that does that. So some of the tools that we have come up with that I want to make sure that you're aware of, and I'm going to refer back to these several times in the presentation, include our IQ, Indicators of Quality, ATR, Assistive Technology Reuse. So Indicators of Quality, it's our online tool that you can go on. It's a self-assessment, and I would encourage you to do this because it will help you sort through some of the liability issues and really think about, some very important issues when it comes to running an effective and safe and appropriate reuse center. And so that tool is free and it's open to you and to anyone who's interested in learning more about reuse and folks that may even be thinking about starting a reuse program. So check that tool out, and I'll show you exactly where that is on our website in just a moment. We also have a knowledge base, and I would encourage you to spend some time there. If you take the Indicators of Quality online assessment, as you answer those questions, then it will, this tool will actually take you immediately to the knowledge base, to specific areas that can help you improve your program. And so it's nice because it gives you instant feedback. We also do free webinars every month, and we talk about liability issues in all of those. Pretty much because it's one of those topics that just continues to grow and evolve. We also have a reuse locations database, and we have several ways for people to find assistive technology, and we've just created a new national online exchange for equipment, and that's called Need AT. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a moment. So this is our website, and we really are here to help you. This is a screenshot of pretty much what you would see if we went to it right now, which we may do in just a few minutes. And so the IQ ATR is down here. It's in the lower part of the website, but in the middle of the website, and it's got some puzzle pieces to it. And then at the very top, you'll see a menu bar. It's red right now. It says Home because that's we're on the home page. And then it talks. The next one's about our National Task Force. But the next button is the knowledge base, and that I'm going to be talking quite a bit about tools that you can get and checklists and other resources that you can get that will help you avoid some liability issues. So. And then right here is our knowledge base. And so, as I said, some of the information I'm going to be covering today, you can get right there. And so I wanted to show you this in particular because I'm hoping that you'll go back and spend some time. And then what I've done is I've pulled information directly from the knowledge base to inform this presentation. A lot of it, if you go into the modules, you'll see we have emergency management, we have finance as a module. We have human resources, marketing, and operations, partner building, sustainability, and you'll see that actually throughout all of these, including the last one, which is user services, there are liability concerns for all of those, especially when you get into how your organization is designed, and then also how are you providing your services. So the big thing that I encourage folks to do is look at their policies and procedures. It's very important that these are written down, that it's documented, that it's something that everyone in your organization understands, and also things that you follow. And when I'm talking about policies, what I'm talking about are high-level guidelines. A policy really is, it's a plan of action that helps guide decisions and actions. It provides your ground rules for effective interactions with folks and with each other. It also reflects high-risk areas and how you should approach that to make sure you do that in a careful way. Policies are usually based on accepted and well-defined norms or standards of practice. And these norms or standards articulate what is to be done. So who is being served, what services are needed, how are you carrying out those services. So I would spend a lot of time working on your policies, and we at the Pass It On Center can also help you if you want us to look at your policies. We do that all the time, and happy to offer that service to you. Procedures, it's more fine-tuning, so it's delineation of the processes, the activities necessary to implement those policies. So in other words, your procedures are more of your day-to-day operations. For example, when you get a wheelchair in, what exactly happens to that wheelchair? Where does it go? What's the evaluation process? Do you have a flow chart, a decision tool? Do you have some way to figure out whether it's worth fixing this wheelchair, whether it's a better idea to strip it for parts, or whether you want to just recycle it altogether? Procedures are usually based on professional guidelines when they're available, and one of the exciting things is that many of you are pioneers in this movement, the AT reuse movement, but we do have more and more folks that are willing to share their guidelines and their policies and their procedures. So we're starting to get a baseline of what professional guidelines are in the area of reuse, and I'm excited to see that. That did not exist 5 years ago. The procedures provide the step-by-step guidance also for basic organizational activities, so client intake, sanitization, delivery of products. And those are procedures that you need to take very seriously. For example, I was working with an organization that would get equipment in, and they had a waiting list, and it really and truly, it depended on who knew who on the waiting list as opposed to any other type of sorting of that waiting list. So it wasn't a fair process, and that opened up this organization to liability concerns because it became actually an issue of discrimination. And so once we got in there and we helped them think this through, work it out, come up with a true, fair, appropriate waiting list mechanism, they actually found that they were more efficient, they were more fair, and it helped with their public relations, which was great. So writing policies and procedures, you need to be organized about this. We actually have examples in our knowledge base, just like I said, where you can actually copy the format. And what we actually recommend here is that you have a table of contents, that they're numbered, and that they're grouped in a logical way. You want to kind of have an outline format, and they need to be not just online, which a lot of people are doing, but they need to be in a notebook, a binder, bound in some way. And I also encourage folks to use the internet to see what kind of structure other folks have used for similar activities and see how people have organized. And once again, you can go to our knowledge base and do that. Whoops. Let me go back here. And I also have a link here that points to a good tool for helping people when they come to looking at what should this really look like. So getting started, it's important to kind of outline what subject areas. Start with that rough table of contents. What are some of the areas that you're concerned about? Is it getting the equipment in? Is it your intake process of your applications to receive the equipment? Is it donations, getting donations, monetary donations in? Is it cleaning the equipment? Is it repairing the equipment? Is it matching the equipment? And so start working, with what's the rough table of contents, and you can do that with the flow of how your equipment comes in. And that would make a lot of sense. But people arrange these different ways, and so you can check them out on our website to see how people have done this. And then pick a subject area. For policies, for example, start writing down how things should work, and I capitalize that, should work. What are the goals, for this? And these should inform each other. So for example, if your organization's goal is to get equipment, reused equipment out to people in a safe and effective way, then you want to make sure that your policies help support that goal. And then for your procedures, you want to start writing down how things work. So very specific tasks. So here's an example. Example policies and procedures, the table of contents. And so you want to have a chapter, where you're looking at organizational structure. What is your organizational structure? Are you within a government agency? Are you a nonprofit? Are you a not-for-profit? Are you for-profit? And we have found that folks actually fit into have all different organizational structures that they're working with. What's your governance? Are you operated with a board of directors, or do you have an advisory council? Is this a program, the reuse program, within a bigger organization? And do you have just a focus group that's helping you? So, what is your governance, and how do you need to think about governance, and who's the decision makers, and all of that? And then insurance is very important. So what type of insurance are you carrying? And I'm going to talk more about insurance in just a little bit. But what do you need to consider when it comes to insurance? And then Chapter 4, user services, and then I actually broke this out a little bit more for you. So those specific policies when it comes to client intake, equipment matching, training and technical assistance. What type of training are you providing to folks? You don't want to give, for example, even a walker out without providing some training on that and technical assistance. And then the delivery of equipment. Do people come to you? Do you go to them? Do you have a policy that says you cannot deliver equipment to someone's house? You open up a lot of liability issues if you start entering people's homes, and you want to be aware of that. And then what is your follow-up procedure? And do you have a follow-up procedure? And then also, what are the operations of your website? So this is a sample policy. And you'll see here, and I'm just going to give you, I'm really using this just as an example. So the policy, what it addresses is the Board of Trustees. The chapter is its personnel, and then you'll see that it's actually got a number there. And then the subject's about personnel files. And then number 1, in the day-to-day operations of the college, and then it talks about what must happen in the day-to-day operations. Number 2, that the records of any past, present employee will be considered confidential record of the college. And then number 3, the president is authorized to establish procedures to implement this policy. And then it talks about, at the very bottom, who approved this and when did they approve it. This is actually just an example. It's an example of a policy that we pulled. You can find a bunch of different examples, but it was a really nice, very concise example of what you should include. So you want to name the policy, you want to number the policy, you want to talk about what the subject is, and then you want to give examples, very specific examples as to what's to happen, and then you want to talk about who approved it, and then what was the date for that. Here's a sample procedure, and this one talks just about workflow for intake, and it's just an example. So for each phone call, if ask if initial contact or if it's a repeat call. So if somebody calls in, that's what you would ask. Use the form for initial telephone intake or follow-up as appropriate, and you read from a script. Some people actually do have scripts for this, for their volunteers that might be answering phones. And then the next piece here is you enter the data from the form into the computer, and you create a new file if it's an initial phone intake, or you access the file and update it if it's an existing file. So very simple. It's very simple. So another sample for the policy and procedure is, once again, this is it's got numbered. It's client intake is what this one's called. All clientele, or all clients, or all people that you serve will be the intake shall be conducted by telephone and documented. So that's the policy. And then the workflow list, and then that's your procedures. And then you would actually talk about your forms and have examples of the forms so that somebody could readily access those. I would also, and this is, I use this slide because this is pulled directly from a group that we're working with. But I would also make sure that your policies and procedures match, the language matches your organization's philosophy. So for example, here in Georgia, we don't say client necessarily. We would say, individual, that we're working with, or recipient, or applicant, depending on, what's the appropriate term. Client is, or there are lots of terms we would not use because it doesn't fall in line with our mission. But just wanted to raise awareness of that also. So checklist. We use, and I encourage you when you're talking about liability and looking at your liability concerns to, and you've got volunteers or staff that are working in your reuse organization or program or project, to use checklist. Checklist, it's really an expansive look at every possible liability issue that may occur, and really looking at all the different things that you want to consider. So not every organization will find every policy and procedure relevant. A lot of organizations, they don't write policies and procedures, so I would encourage you to make sure that you do that, and that you also have a procedure once you start getting those policies and procedures in place where you go back and you address those over time. And it will help you as far as identifying what some of the liability issues are in your own organization, and then coming up with action steps so you can mitigate your liability concerns. So here I'm going to throw out some of the liability issues that are out there. Organizational structure. You want to make sure that you and the folks that you're working with understand your organizational structure and that you are working within that legally. There have been groups that I've worked with that, believe it or not, they didn't know if they were a 501c3. They just started taking donations in and giving tax deductions. And several times they weren't even a 501c3. So they truly had no legal, there was no way they could really give a tax deduction. They couldn't give a receipt. And so paying attention to what is your status? How are you registered? How are you operating? Then also looking at your staffing model. Do you have employees? Do you have volunteers? That is something you want to consider, especially when you're looking at insurance and you're looking at who's going to be covered under your insurance policies. So then governance, just like I talked about before, your board, your advisory committee, and then also how's this project managed, and what is the relationship of the advisory committee to the board? Or the advisory committee or the board to the overall management of the operation. Do you have board insurance to cover folks that are on your board from having any liability concerns when it comes to the activities that you're doing when it comes to reuse? And then also just looking at your overall documents and how are you operating, once again, what is it that makes sense? Some of the liability issues when it comes to insurance and things you want to consider, there, as I said, director's insurance and officer's insurance. A lot of reuse programs now have that. I know that there's a board that I was working with just the other day that they got it for under $700 for their board, and it made everybody feel a lot better because they knew that this organization is doing an excellent job in serving the community, but they wanted to protect the board from any potential liability issues. There's also key person insurance that some folks have actually bought for their reuse programs. If you have one person that reuse program is absolutely dependent upon. So might want to consider that. If you have employees, obviously insurance to cover their activities, whether it's in the process of getting equipment in or delivering equipment. Once again, thinking about whether or not you're going into somebody's house. And then volunteers, if you have them driving vehicles, are they covered? You know, who drives your vehicles? Who delivers this equipment? And if you think about this, what some people have done when they're looking at these different liability issues, they have defined and shaped their reuse program in a way that they can avoid most of these concerns. And so I'm just tossing out things for you to think about. Same thing with, you know, the car driver insurance. Looking at facility insurance, do you have certain areas that you don't allow people just to wander through? More and more we're seeing where reuse programs are getting much more savvy about this, where they actually say, you know, this is the room where we will do intake for getting equipment in and also processing that equipment. And here is the room where we match people to equipment. And here's the waiting room for folks who are waiting to get that equipment. And then that's pretty much the only place that the public can go. And so are y'all doing that? Have you thought about that? And then also, you know, insurance that covers your inventory. We've seen this recently where there was a reuse program that was flooded and they lost a lot of their inventory, and thankfully they had insurance and they were able to purchase new equipment for new tools for making repairs, but actually new equipment in general, and they were able to get that out to folks. So that's where insurance really was helpful. Also your activities, making sure that your liability, you have insurance that covers your specific activities and how you're carrying out those activities, your property, just like I was talking about. So, and within the policies, you want to think about who are you going to insure, what activities are you going to insure, and also this should inform and it should be reflected in your coverage. So, other things that you want to think about when you're talking about liability issues is how involved are the consumers, the folks that you're working with. One program that we work with actually has a policy where folks give back in sweat equity, which actually came from Jimmy Carter. That concept came from the Habitat for Humanity folks. And so looking at that and seeing if there might be some liability issues if you have folks going out in exchange for their equipment, they're volunteering somewhere else, you know, there might be a liability issue there that you need to consider. Human resources, looking at legal compliance. Do you have subcontractors? Do you have employees? How are you operating under fair labor laws in your state and also federal regulations there? Also considering OSHA. There's a reuse program that we just worked with who had, you know, some issues, if you will, with OSHA, and we were able to work with them and get those straightened out, and very glad we did, and everything was much better. Discrimination is another thing that we encourage folks to really pay attention to. As we talked about last time I was in California, is the whole idea of nothing about us without us. I'd love to see reuse programs that obviously are operated by folks that would benefit from the reuse program. So what are some of the laws you want to consider and legal considerations there? And then the recruitment. Yes. Oh, good. Great. Okay, and thank you very much for asking the question, Jesse. The OSHA issues, what happened was there was a warehouse and it had a bunch of equipment in there, and including batteries and electrical equipment, and this organization had not organized the batteries and the equipment. They literally were taking it in. They had gotten some huge donations, and so it was all piled together. And one of the folks that work there actually got concerned about it and is a volunteer and said, hey, you know, we might want to get, you know, this more organized. And OSHA, believe it or not, well, the fire chief came through and got in touch with OSHA, and so OSHA came in and they actually said, hey, you have got some fire concerns here that are pretty big, and you've also got, whether it's volunteer or not, the way that OSHA operates is that they often consider volunteers would be just employees, so you want to make sure that you are protecting anyone. So it's, obviously their main focus is safety, health, and making sure that it's a safe environment for people and healthy environment for people to work in. The concerns that they had is the way that the equipment was being stored was unsafe. It could have fallen, and it actually did fall several times. Thankfully, no one was hurt. They had, for example, all of their crutches were being held on a wall, but with just a board sticking out, and there was way too much weight on that board, and it was coming out of the wall. The batteries were not on a pallet. They were actually just all together. And the folks there at this program are very lucky that those batteries didn't catch fire, because that does happen. And some of them had already started leaking. And that's just not a safe environment for people. So what happened is we got in there, we helped them figure out where all the concerns were. We showed them safe ways to store the equipment, taught them about battery safety, and the importance of not just throwing your batteries on the ground and stacking them all together in a big pile. And then OSHA came back and they were very pleased with all of that. So does that answer your question,
Justin? Another question.
Great.
Sorry,
I am so happy.
Is there information
that helped. So that's good.
Proper storage?
So going back here, let's see. Yes. Absolutely. Yes, we actually have in the knowledge base a whole section on storage of equipment, and we have a webinar where we spend an hour and a half talking about storage of equipment, and we give all different examples of that, how you store equipment. We also have diagrams and a lot of video. We have a YouTube channel that we show how different folks have stored their equipment. So does that answer your question? Yay. Okay, great. So there's, going back to the presentation, I'm glad that answered your question. So looking at, employee, obviously, liability issues, and most of you are familiar with those. If you're not, you can go back to our knowledge base for the human resource area, and you can see, about considering some of the liability issues when it comes to workers' compensation, and making sure that you have job descriptions. Even for volunteers, we encourage you to have job descriptions. If you are, for example, if you're an occupational therapist who is volunteering with a program because you're maybe working on your master's or doctorate degree, and you're wanting to get some practice matching equipment in individuals, which we actually have several schools that are doing this with reuse programs around the country, you want to have a job description for that. That helps with liability issues. You want to make sure that folks are not practicing outside of their scope or outside of what their specific activity is. And then looking at volunteers, where you have an idea of who actually looks at your records, like applications and what information is collected, making sure that you're not violating HIPAA, which is your Health Protection Act standards that are out there, and those are very easy to access, and we also have information on our website about that in the knowledge base. But also when you have volunteers, I encourage folks to do background checks and just make that part of your policy, that you're going to check everybody's records, and know who these folks are that are working with you. Have an interview process. And then also have a job description, as I said, for volunteers. And subcontractors, making sure that you have agreements and contracts with these folks that are solid, and that also delineate where is the liability, who's responsible. Other liability issues you want to consider is your training, just like I used the example before about making sure that you're training people on how to, if they get a walker, how to use that walker, where to use that walker, when is it safe, when is it not safe. Same thing with batteries for your power wheelchairs, or if you get a computer, what types of things do you need to consider when it comes to safety with the computer. For example, there are some folks that were giving out computers and they weren't going over any ergonomic information with the individuals, and so they were having folks coming back that had repetitive stress, situations happening in their hands and their necks and their eyes, and you go in and you could see that the folks had positioned the computers in ways that are just not safe ergonomically. And then also we encourage folks to have performance evaluations, even of their volunteers. And then there's a bunch of information in finance and accounting that you want to consider. We have all of that in our knowledge base. And then same thing with the user services, and we have very specific things to think about when it comes to liability considerations. For example, with the delivery of the equipment, making sure that if you are working with somebody who speaks a different language, that you provide the training materials in that language, and take the time to do that. And then also making sure that you're matching the equipment appropriately, that if you are reusing augmentative communication devices, that you're using a speech therapist or working with someone with a speech therapist to assist in this, if it is something that is necessary, if that's something that you really think would help. And then also the program operations. This definitely includes safety and some of the recommendations from the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. So looking at your acquisitions, are you acquiring equipment and then putting it with equipment that you've already sanitized? How are you tracking your inventory and making sure that you have an inventory management system so that you know if there is a recall on equipment, which does happen every now and again, and we often get those, we're signed up on a recall list and we get alerts from the FDA and other groups, that we can send out an alert and say, hey everybody, this specific battery has caught fire, which is actually a true thing in this specific type of wheelchair. So get those back. And sure enough, we sent an alert maybe 2 years ago, and 6 wheelchairs were reclaimed in different states. They had gone through the reuse programs, and people were able to get those back and replace it with another wheelchair, which was great. Looking at the evaluation process and making sure of the equipment, but also working with the individual and making sure that this is appropriate. And then the repairing or refurbishing, looking at who actually is doing the repairing. Do they have any certifications? Have you put them through any training? And that does help with your liability issues. I'm a huge believer in training the individuals who work in our reuse programs on the equipment that they are refurbishing and repairing. And then sanitization. By the way, almost all of these issues, all of these things that I have pulled out here, from sanitization, storage, acquisition, we have webinars and complete sections in the knowledge base on these areas. So distribution and transportation of the equipment is another thing that you want to consider. Storage, just like I spoke about before with OSHA, and then disposal and recycling. And then also looking at your website operations. If you have a website, and I know y'all, I'm looking at the list of the folks that are here, almost all of you, I'm sure all of you actually are very familiar with accessibility features for websites, but there are lots of reuse programs that we have worked with that have no clue what we're talking about whatsoever when it comes to accessibility for websites, privacy, and also HIPAA. You know, for example, you wouldn't want to just take pictures of people and throw them up on your website. So being mindful of those things. And then other liability issues when it comes to marketing. As I said, you don't want to just take pictures and put information out there. You want to make sure that you have solid community relationships with folks, that you're not misrepresenting what you do, that the way that you accept donations is legal, that you don't misrepresent what you're going to do with that equipment, that you're not getting donations in and then turning around and selling the equipment. What we encourage folks to do, rather than, let's say that and we've had this, I can't even tell you how many times I've answered this question, where somebody will say, oh, we're gonna sustain our program by having people pay for the equipment. That's not a good model. What you can do is give the equipment out to individuals and have them pay for the service of that equipment. So pay for you providing the service of getting the equipment in, refurbishing it, sanitizing it, and then getting it back out. And that is a much safer liability-wise way to look at that, is to operate from that standpoint of getting paid for the service, not for the device. So. And then also consumer education. We put that in the marketing and public relations area. And then looking obviously at your protocols and making sure that you know what your return on investment is, and that you know what your program profile really is. Making sure that your partners are ones that you really do want to partner with, and your collaborators are folks that are in line with your mission. And just paying attention to that, liability-wise, making sure that if you are working with an end-of-life metal reuse recycling group, that they are not dumping that into the ocean, because you want to make sure that won't take your program down. I encourage all the time surprise lunch visits, or hi, I'm here to visit you, if you are working with end-of-life recyclers, making sure that you know how they're really operating, because that can often be a surprise. And then once again, looking at sustainability, just like I said, in the fees, and then your disaster preparedness plan for your organization. There's a whole other area where we talk about disasters and emergencies and ATV use, but I'm talking about your organization in particular. What is your continuity of operations? What's your plan there? And then also, do you have insurance to help cover that? So I have a whole section here on the FDA, and they do have, a lot of people don't know this, we did a lot of research on this, and with the Pass It On Center. And the Food and Drug Administration actually has jurisdiction over the manufacturing and distribution of medical devices. I did not know that actually until about 7 years ago. So some AT devices fall within the definition of a medical device and some don't. So in Section 201 of the Act, a medical device is an instrument, apparatus, implement, machine, implant, in vitro, in vitro reagent, that's what it is, or other similar related article, including a component, part, or necessary, or accessory. Which is, and then it gives you a whole definition here of all of those things that could be something that could help with a disease or a condition or the cure, mitigation, treatment, prevention of a disease. So I had no clue that they were the ones that actually regulated this. So we see that the regulation under the FDA of medical devices include a registration of those device listing, the labeling, and exactly how it's being used, pre-market notification, and so it's very specific. And so we've got a whole paper on this, and so I would encourage you to check it out and see. which devices, for example, need a prescription, which ones don't. Does that prescription follow the device? And for example, there's a group in Texas. It's a reuse program that will only give out equipment to folks who have a prescription. So anyway, you can get all of that information on our knowledge base. So we do encourage you to know your inventory. We encourage you to obviously address any sanitization issues and guidelines that are out there, and really know what what are the sanitization, what are the different degrees of that. It's sterilization versus cleaning, and you can get all of that information on our website. So and tracking the FDA recalls, and you can get that information also on our website. So we do, as I said, encourage folks to have qualified technicians for their reassignment, refurbishing, and then also the recycling activities if they're tearing the equipment apart. And part of also what the FDA really requires is that folks report adverse events. So if you, and we have our reuse programs also doing this, if something doesn't function correctly, or if they see something with a device that is a device failure, it's important to report those things to the FDA. And we have had several incidents where people have been able to do that. It's also important that you understand and apply your own state. What are California's statutes and regulations? Do you have a Good Samaritan Act? And actually you do. I looked it up. And how does that apply to your reuse programs? It's actually not specifically named within your Good Samaritan Act. We have a couple of states where it is named, and that's a good thing. So we also encourage people to work closely and collaborate with local vendors, because a lot of times that will help mitigate or help folks lessen their liability issues, because those vendors that are doing this professionally for profit have all that insurance often. And so if they're helping with some of that with your program, then it's already covered. So, and as I said, the end of life recycling, making sure that you know where those parts are going. So there are some basic guidelines for exchange programs, and I know that Alan has heard some of these, and some of these are covered also in the FDA. Making sure that if the FDA issues a ban, what we've had is some exchange programs where the FDA ban list or recall list automatically goes to their website, and so it sends out an alert to folks who have the exchange networks that are operating. I know in Georgia we've done that. So if the FDA sends out an alert, it goes automatically to our website, and that way people have an idea of what's going on. So same thing if you're operating an online exchange, and that you would have a list of best practices and buyer beware guidelines. So this is for folks who, where you're not handing them equipment, but you're actually matching people in a classified ads type scenario, just so you can help people be better and informed of their decisions. And also teaching people how to clean the equipment and really take care of the equipment. That's a good strategy. It's a good practice for best practice actually for model reuse programs, where you are teaching people how to keep their devices clean and keep it so that it is safe, and making sure that folks are aware of how to do that. So. We do encourage you to comply with prescription use practices if there are devices that you are issuing that actually require a prescription. We often encourage people just to stay away from those types of things. So. And do y'all have any questions for me? I covered a lot of information, and I just wanted you to be aware. This is really, as I said as we started out, kind of the beginning of the conversation, because it's one of those conversations that, as I told you, that as folks grow their reuse programs, they have different issues that come up and different things that they want to talk about. So, do y'all have any questions for me right now? And I really do appreciate y'all's time and your interest in this. I'm actually pulling up, as y'all are maybe thinking about your questions, our website. And so I typed in passitoncenter.org, and let's see here. If it comes up, it should come up. Okay, so I think you said that there's so much information you're going to watch the webinar a second time. Oh, great. So hopefully it'll be fascinating the second time around too. And so you're very welcome. Thank you, Katie. I appreciate that, that feedback. So any other questions that you have for me? Okay. So Owen, it looks like you're asking me, did I say that reuse programs do not have to report adverse events to the FDA? I did not say that. What I said is that actually a lot of reuse programs do report adverse events to the FDA. It's not a requirement, but it's a sign of a good program to do that. And we've also found, for example, within the computer reuse world, that there were some batteries that were catching fire. And it was a reuse program that first figured this out, because it was when the equipment came back and was given out to another user, the time, I guess there was enough time that had lapsed from the original manufacturing that they were like, you know what, after 6 years this battery is going to catch fire. And that was very helpful. So to report those things, it's a good practice. So, and Steve, I think you said it would be great to have a second seminar on storage and such. I would be thrilled to do that. I actually really enjoy talking about storage, believe it or not. It may seem boring to a lot of people, but I think it's fascinating to see what your peers around the country have done and some of the creative solutions that they've come up with and how they can inform you and other folks in making really great use of your space, and also avoiding some of those liability issues by not recontaminating equipment. And there's some really great practices that people have come up with. So I'd be happy to do that, Steve, if that's what y'all would like. So I've pulled up here the Pass It On Center knowledge base. And in the site search, I was just going to type in the word liability, L-I-A-B-I-L-I-T-Y. Hopefully I spelled it correctly. And you'll see that we have a whole list of documents that come up from, and I pulled from all of these to put this presentation together so that I could talk to you all today about all of this. But it talks about risk management strategies, liability concerns overall with reuse programs, assigning the device, matching the device, insurance for programs, AT device delivery, matching device for loan programs, how to write policies and procedures. So you'll see that it covers all of that, including your organizational structure, incorporation statuses. So I really would encourage you to spend some time looking at all of that and seeing, you know, what it is that you need to do to avoid liability issues and be able to, as I started out this presentation with saying that, you know, focus on your goal and build your program around that goal. So any other questions you have for me? I know I spoke really quickly. I just wanted to make sure that we had enough time and were able to cover everything that y'all asked me to cover. So. Oh, thank you, Jesse. I appreciate that. And Katie, y'all are very kind. I would do the same for you, so I'll clap for y'all too. that's a fun little feature. So thank you all very much. I do hope this was helpful, and that it does meet some of the, I guess, address some of the questions that you had, and help you think more about your reuse programs as y'all fine-tune them or create them in order to really meet your missions and serve the folks of California. So I appreciate what y'all do. It's really a small community of us that are doing this type of work around the country, and it's always exciting to learn from each other and also grow the programs. And so as I see it, my success and our success is interdependent with your success. And so any way that we can help you, we definitely want to be able to help you. One of the questions that was asked as we were talking about creating this webinar was if I knew of anybody who had been sued. And I actually know of just 2 different groups that have been sued. Both of them, one was a big deal. The other one was actually not as big of a deal. The bigger one happened in New Jersey, and that really and truly was it was not a well thought out program. They had not informed folks very well of the equipment that they were getting, and so folks weren't using the equipment appropriately, and it just escalated. And so that program is no longer in operation, and we learned quite a bit from that. And that happened at least 12 years ago, so it was long before we started working in this area. So. And then the other one was where somebody had just, they had gone into someone's house and they dropped a piece of equipment, and it fell through the floor. And it was a university actually related program, and the university just bought a new floor for the individual. So insurance covered that, and the people said, oh, we're going to sue, but they ended up not suing. So those are the 2 real incidents that I've ever heard of when it comes to folks, being sued. As I said, we encourage people to really be aware of, their liability and their insurance, and take all of those things really seriously, so that you can keep doing this good work. And I know that it looks like you're asking me to push the slide. So let me see.
For those who are already thinking about doing reuse or already involved in doing reuse, and I really hope it's encouraged all of you to think what are ways we can better reduce any kind of liability so we can make sure that reuse programs do grow in California. Thank you so much for all the participants for coming and attending. I hope you found that the presentation really helpful in the work that you guys are doing. At the end, when you guys all close out, you'll get your presentation, and also you will get if you want to do the recording, we'll send out the recording to you as well. You can do that on the AT Exchange website. We have all that. AT Exchange website, you can have all that information there. And then I think we will hopefully think about reconsidering the storage webinar in the future. If that's the case, we'll keep you guys updated if that's the webinar we might have in the future. And of course, if you guys have any questions, please visit the Pass It On Center website. It has a wealth of information. And if you guys could also, if you have any questions for Caroline directly, you can also email her as well. Her email is on this page. Thank you so much again for all your participation. At the end, when you exit, there's going to be a survey. Please fill out the quick survey. It's really easy. It helps us kind of give us an idea of what your thoughts are on the reuse liability webinar. And if you would like any we would like to get your feedback so that we know how to better improve our webinars for future programs. Thank you so much again for attending. Have a great day. Bye.